It's go time.
Welcome to Quick Kicks here on Third Down Gamble, with your host Don Charbin, with special guest, Sean Campbell of TSN 690 in Montreal, the English radio voice of the Montreal Alouettes.
Joining me now on the podcast is a renowned author, Paul Woods, who, if you're following the CFL at all, you've probably seen his books Bouncing Back, the story of the 1981 Argonauts, and the Year of the Rocket, the story of the 1991 through 94 Rocket. 2 years in there, but McNall and Gretzky and all them having the team of the Toronto Argonauts. Paul, always great to talk to you, but you've got another project that you've got on the go, something that you're developing for YouTube. Talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Nice to be here. It's always fun to talk to you, and always fun to talk CFL and CFL history. And so I do have a new project that I think your listeners will be interested in if they follow the CFL, if they're interested in the history of the CFL. I've created a YouTube channel called Canadian Football Time Machine. The purpose of the channel is to share with the world thousands, literally thousands of clips that I recorded over a 40-plus year span about Canadian football. These are not games. I mean, there are great sources on the web already for old Canadian football games, and I do have some games that I recorded that probably are not on the web yet, and someday I'll get them up there. But the purpose on this is to share the archive of news and feature and highlight clips that I recorded going back to the mid-'80s. I was compulsively taping sportscasts and things like what was originally called Sports Desk on TSN. Now, of course, it's Sports Center. And I was capturing the way they were covering the Canadian Football League, and a lot of it is Argo related because I'm an Argo fan. But it's not just Argo; it's the entire league. I taped this stuff like a fanatic, like a madman for all those years. I guess probably for about 20 years on VHS, and then starting in 2006, I started capturing it directly onto digital. But I've got this massive archive of footage about the league, about how the league was covered through its trials and tribulations, its ups and downs, things like resignation of one commissioner and the appointment of another commissioner, or ownership changes when teams changed hands, major trades, major coaching changes, major player signings. And I've been just going through and uploading this stuff, 10 to 20 clips per day, roughly on average over the last month or so since I started the channel. I'm up to over 800 clips on there now, basically from 1986 on, and I'm now in the middle of uploading 1991, hundreds of clips from 1991, which was, of course, the year of the Rocket. And thanks for the plug for my book. But it's fascinating to go back and look at this stuff. I've got contemporaneous footage of the day the Montreal Alouettes folded in 1987. How was that covered on CBC National News? How was it covered on CTV National News? How was it covered on TSN? How was it covered by local sports in the city that I was living in at the time, which happened to be Calgary? You can find all the Grey Cups are on YouTube somewhere, but I've got the pregame shows, right? And sometimes those were 2-hour extravaganzas, and Brian Williams interrogating the commissioner of the day, that sort of stuff. It's all on this channel, so it's up there. If anybody's interested in exploring the history of the Canadian Football League since the mid-'80s, I would advise you to go check it out and then just keep coming back, because there's going to be more. That's going to take me, I've been saying it's going to take me years to get this thing fully populated. I'm now 800 clips in, and I'm only basically through the first 4.5 years of this journey that's going to be a 40 to 50 year journey by the time it's over with. I mean, I hope I live long enough to get all these clips up there, but there's some incredible stuff. I mean, as I go through it and as I break these clips down and pull them together, I see things and I go, oh man, I completely forgot about that. Or it's so interesting to see what this guy said back then, and then how his impression of something changed, how the league was perceived back then. Some years it was perceived to be in a giant crisis. Other years it was perceived to be doing really well. I'm still uploading 1991, but I'm now editing stuff from 1992. Way up next is 1993, which is the beginning of the expansion era. And I've got a ton of stuff about the U.S. expansion era that's going to be coming in the coming months. I think people are going to find it really fascinating to see how, the original announcement from Larry Smith, we're going to expand to the U.S. And then when the first team arrives and all how that stuff happens, how it all played out in a news sense, in a reporting sense, a journalistic sense. So that's my project. I've already heard from people who say I can't stop going to the channel. I keep seeing things. I keep wanting to go back every day and see more. Like it's stuff that's been living in my basement for 40 years and no one else has had a chance to see it. Now the world's got a chance to see it. I'm really glad to be doing it.
Bless you for doing so. It's amazing that you do that, and it's a great gift to the world. I'm so happy that you're doing this. And it's a sad thing, especially about Canadiana. Networks tended not to keep much. They always were sort of putting the magnet over it and reusing everything. And there's so much that's lost, that from famous people, from interesting stories. And thank goodness you had the forethought to record this stuff ahead of time. And now you're taking this opportunity, and it's a lot of work, I can imagine, putting this up on YouTube to share it with the world, because it is vitally important.
Well, thank you, Don. I mean, yeah, I agree. Like this is a part of Canadian culture. The Canadian Football League, for better or worse, is a big part of what Canada is all about. And I don't really know why I started doing this. I mean, I kind of had a compulsion to document the Argonauts and the Canadian Football League. And so as soon as I got my first VCR back in the day, I started taping this stuff and taping games. And I just felt like, and I don't think I realized back then what I later found out, which is what you just said. The networks did not archive their own stuff. They reused tapes. The league, of course, has been perpetually underfunded and never was in a position to really kind of build its own archive. It's funny, a funny little story about, I'm going to guess around 20 years ago. I can't really put a specific time frame on, but it was sometime in the early 2000s, I think. The Canadian Football League put out a news release saying, we want to build our own archive. We want to sort of create an archive of our own content. If you've got content, let us know. And they actually hired a third party, an outside company, to kind of manage the search. I wrote to them and said, I got 20, at that time it was 20 years worth of games and news footage and all kinds of stuff in my basement. I'm willing to give it to you. I never heard back. You're right, it is a lot of work, although it's been work that's been spread over a long period of time. I mean, obviously I've been recording it since the mid 80s, but I started digitizing in 2006, taking a VCR, plug a VCR into a digital recorder and then run it in real time, create a digital file from that. I would do editing. I would, take out commercials and things like that. But that was an enjoyable pastime. I often did it while I was like riding a stationary bike or walking on a treadmill in my basement and, having a remote control in one hand, doing, some editing and so on. And gradually I put all this stuff onto DVD, which seemed like the most logical way to store it at the time. So I've got binders full of DVDs of digitized content that was originally recorded in analog on VHS. And now I'm going through the binders and I'm having to sort of again kind of then capture them to computer and do some editing and do some organizing and so on. So yeah, it takes time, but it's a labor of love, and I'm doing it specifically for what you said, for what I said. I want people to have access to this stuff. I think it's important for the history of the league and for and Canadian culture that this stuff be preserved. I want somebody to be able to, 50 years from now, when I'm long gone, to be able to go back and look at how did the league get covered when this major thing happened back in 1996 or whatever it was. And so I will have provided that to them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, I mean, maybe if you hadn't been born 50 years earlier, we could have it right from the 1950s onward, because there's so much that happened in the league. And as I sort of iterated before, it really comes down to the people like you and me, that whatever it is we do, we seem to keep that history alive. I used to have some video of old games, but unfortunately the tapes have busted and whatever else. People like CFL Classics on YouTube, I just commend the work that's done there, because it's not just Grey Cups. It's not just playoff games. It's actually in-season games that are being posted there all the time. And so you get to see some of the big stars of the era. CFL Video 1984, I think, is the other one I think of, is another place that you can watch vintage games, like all the way back to the 60s.
Yeah, those are great sites. The CFL Classics has a gigantic collection of game footage. I've shared some of mine with Tom, and I will share more in the future. And I will post games on my own at some point. But I've made a point that for now I'm focusing on this project, and the games will have to wait. You mentioned it's too bad I wasn't born 50 years earlier. And of course, there wasn't really the recording capability. VCRs kind of came into existence became a consumer item in the late 70s, but they were expensive. I waited. I wanted one almost from the moment I heard of the concept of a VCR, but I didn't get one until 1983 when I finally was able to. I think I spent $750, which at the time, by today's dollar standard, would be a pretty high number to get my first VCR, and I immediately started taping, Argonaut games and things like that. Sad story is that I got transferred from Toronto out to Calgary in 1986, and as part of the transfer, the company hired a moving company to move my stuff, and a box of videotapes got lost. There's some games that they've never surfaced anywhere that I had. So it always, every time I think about that, I get sad and mad. But basically, everything I've recorded since '86 is still intact. And oddly enough, again, I'm really kind of gibbering on here, but the quality of videotapes degraded over the years. The tapes that I bought in the mid 1980s are in way better shape than tapes I bought in 2005. They got junky. They made them cheap. So I've got footage from the early 2000s before I started recording digitally that is in pretty rough shape. And I've got games from 1986 that are in amazing shape. It's all there. And I did have the good fortune that I lived out west for 7 years. And so as an Argo fan, I got to tape almost every Argo game because I wasn't dealing with local blackouts, except when they came to Calgary or Edmonton. And then by the time I moved back to Toronto in 93, there were no more blackouts going on. So I've got virtually every televised Argonaut game since 1986. I think there's maybe one or two exceptions of games that were televised but blacked out in Calgary or Edmonton when I lived out there. So from that standpoint, from an Argo fan standpoint, it's a treasure trove. But of course, the sports desks and the sports casts on the local news and things like that, none of that was ever blacked out. And so when a big thing happened in the CFL, I made sure the VCR was queued up to record that stuff, and then gradually got it digitized and so on.
And you make a great point about this, actually. The league is one thing. It's the game that's played, whoever wins the championship, but there's the business of the game as well. And that is usually covered in the media, not so much the teams putting out promotional material about we're going to do this, that, or the other thing, but I mean more the stories behind it, where what you do is you provide a person with more depth. You give that breadth of information so that it's not just the 1986 CFL season. No, it's the 86 CFL season, which happens to be the last of the Alouettes. And that's the type of stuff that I think is so wonderful.
Well, and also even things like how the teams marketed themselves and how the league marketed itself, right? Like, I mean, I've got a really cool clip up there from I think 88 maybe. Calgary Stampeders hired George Wendt, the actor from Cheers. George Wendt, was filmed wearing a Stampeders sweater in the stands, talking about the Stampeders, and so that kind of stuff, right? And how even the networks. I mean, I got some like TSN's own little commercials about the upcoming game on TSN. It's kind of cool to see how they portrayed it, right? And so it's a real slice of following. You start to look at the stuff. It starts to paint a picture, and it tells a story. And I've tried to kind of create some playlists to sort of group things together. So there's things like financial woes, because there were some financial woes. 1987 was a rough year. The Alouettes folded, and a couple of other teams were on the brink. And so there's footage of how were the league's struggles covered by the electronic broadcast media during the course of that year. It's a supplement. Obviously, you could also go back and you could look at newspaper archives and see how those things were covered. And of course, I got a pile of those as well. But in terms of this stuff, historians who actually care about how this league has gone up and down over the years and why it's still around, even though it looked like it was on the brink of extinction many times, this tells that part of that story.
A story that's rarely told is that meeting that they had in Hamilton after the Grey Cup of 96, where they were debating, okay, do we continue on? Even though they had a successful Grey Cup, a successful year, But the U.S. expansion experiment was over. And now the league had to sit down and say, are we in this for a long time or not? And there was a call around the room saying, I don't want to know if you're here for 12 months. I want to know if you're here that you can still run this. And they took a vote and said, yep, we're going forward. That's when they started to talk to the NFL and see if they could make some inroads with that league to get some help.
To get some financial help. That's right. And of course, I'm not up to that stuff yet in terms of the organizing, right? I'm still at 91, 92. So that's looming down the road, maybe several months from now or whatever, I'll get up to 96. But I'm fascinated myself to see that. I mean, I was at that Grey Cup in 96. They were relying on Tim Hortons to give them enough money to give the players their game checks. And so it's going to be fascinating to go back and watch the coverage of that Grey Cup week, how the league was covered, what was said on the pregame show, et cetera, about the state of the league. I'm fascinated to go back and see what did Brian Williams have to say when he interviewed. I guess it might have been John Tory. I don't even remember who was. I think it was John Tory in '96, because you're right. The league was on the brink at that point. And so over time, as over the months and the years, as this stuff rolls out, that story will be able to be kind of contextualized and followed in a way that I think will help people understand it, particularly younger people who weren't around for any of that, right?
Well, and you think about it too. The NFL went through those same troubles that incessantly through their first 30 to 40 years. They were losing teams, they were merging teams, they were struggling all the time. So it's not unique to Canadian football that these types of things happen. The way that I look at it is that when Paul Tagliabue shows up at the 1997 Grey Cup in Edmonton, Saskatchewan and Toronto play in that game, and he is totally impressed by the fact that there are 50,000 people out in mid-November in this cold stadium watching this game. And he thought, well, this is for real. We should get involved. Yeah.
It's one of those important defining moments of Canadian football in the modern era, and it will eventually be part of Canadian football time machine, right? And then there'll be lots of things since then, right? Like the demise of the Ottawa Rough Riders after the '96 season, and then the coming of the Ottawa Renegades, and then the demise of the Renegades, and the coming of the Red Blacks. There's these types of stories are going to be part of this as we go forward. Not to mention, coverage of amazing players and coaches and games and things that happen that are all positive, right? I mean, I'm just, as I say, I'm in 92, so I'm sort of getting through some of the stuff when Doug Flutie went from the Lions to the Stampeders, and now we're on, over the coming weeks and months, I'll be putting together footage about Doug's time with the Stampeders, and then later his time with the Argonauts. And, that's obviously maybe the greatest player in the history of Canadian football, and part of his story will be documented here.
The thing that I always loved about Doug Flutie, A, he was just a treat to watch, but B, I had no idea he would sneak into the facility wherever the Argonauts happened to be or the Stampeders happened to be, and he would put in extra film study and work to prep himself for a game. He was so dedicated.
Well, and I think I don't know if he was the last one, but he was one of the last quarterbacks to call his own plays. Matthews just gave him complete license. You call the game the way you want to call it. And those 96, 97 Argonauts teams were basically unstoppable. Arguably the greatest team in the history of Canadian football, although there's cases to be made for others, for the Baltimore Stallions of 95 and for the Eskimo dynasty of the late 70s, early 80s, and some teams in recent years even you could make that case for. But Flutie himself is a really cool story. And I mean, one of the things that I'm looking forward to finding in my collection when I get to that point, I will never forget the day Doug Flutie signed with the Argonauts. They paraded him around Front Street wearing a full uniform. I mean, he was walking up and down one of Toronto's busiest streets in uniform in the off season to try to drum up interest in the Argonauts. And there's footage of that. I know I recorded it, and I can't wait to see it. It looks kind of incongruous, right? Like Doug Flutie walking around in a football uniform on the middle of the street. But it's coming. When I get to 96, I'm going to find that, and it'll be up there, right? So,
but that was the type of person he was. It mattered most that everything around him succeeded. He was the type of guy that made people better because he was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug was he was an incredible force to be reckoned with, and we were lucky to have him up in this league for 8 seasons, and really all of them. I mean, the last 7 of them, he was amazing. One year he was injured for part of the year, so his streak of MOPs, I think, was broken briefly. But yeah, what an amazing player.
Hi, I'm Adam Rita. We're listening to the Third Down Podcast.
I mentioned off the top that you've written some books, and one of them is the book that you put out. This is a few years ago now, Bouncing Back. A lot of people don't remember that the last time the Argos had won a Grey Cup was 1952, and there was a lot of time in the wilderness, even though they got there in 71 and Liam McQuay slipped. It was few and far between for that big franchise to be in Grey Cups.
Yeah, and that's actually that was the impetus for the book. I mean, it's Bouncing Back, and then the subtitle is From National Joke to Grey Cup Champs, because they really were for almost the entire period between 1952 and 1982. They were a national joke. They could find incredibly ridiculous ways to lose games and to miss the playoffs. I mean, one year they went into Hamilton on the final game of the regular season. All they had to do was lose the game by 15 points and they were in the playoffs. And of course, they lost it by 16 points. They did this kind of stuff regularly. And I became a fanatical Argonaut. I was a fan starting in the late 60s under the first Leo Cahill era with Bobby Taylor and later Joe Theismann and Liam McQuay and those guys. But I became a really dedicated, fanatical fan in 1977. And so I got to witness some of those horrible years, 77, 78, 79, 80. I moved to Toronto in 1980 and started going to games in 80. And I bought my first pair of seasons tickets in 81, which happened to be the worst year in Argonauts history. They were 2-14. They could have made the playoffs with one more win. Montreal got in with 3 wins, and the Argos managed to not even get into the playoffs in a year when you only needed to have 3 wins. And yet, many of the same guys that were there in 81 were there in 82 when they became super entertaining and exciting, and then in 83 when they broke the 31-year drought. So Bouncing Back tells the story of that 3-year arc from the worst year in team history to the end of what at the time was the longest Grey Cup drought, I guess, or certainly one of them. I mean, I guess the Rough Riders had a pretty long wait till 66. It's an incredible story because, I remember the last game of the 81 season down at the Exhibition Stadium. And I took a streetcar down to the game and back home after the game. And I'm on this jam-packed streetcar and I've got my little portable radio with my little earbuds are in, listening to the post-game show. And one of the guys says, the worst thing is, the Argos just finished a year at 2-14, and they've got no good talent on this team. And I thought, what are you talking about? They've got Condridge Holloway and Terry Greer and Cedric Minter and Paul Pearson and a bunch of Dan Ferroni and a bunch of young Canadian talent, Jan Carinci. And I thought, you're wrong. Despite being 2-14, I think this team is going to be good next year. They subsequently hired Bob Obilovich, and they did become good. They finally were able to beat the Edmonton Eskimos, which they hadn't been able to do in about 6 or 7 years. And it was an incredible night in Exhibition Stadium when finally the first chapter of the book the title is We're for Real. It's the players themselves seeing this incredible connection between Condridge Holloway and Terry Greer as Greer burned Joe Holloman twice for these incredible touchdowns, and the Argos held on to beat the Eskimos, who were on the cusp of their 5th Grey Cup in a row. And so that was a super fun year to be a fan. We finally good, and then we get to the Grey Cup at home. They lost. Edmonton won for the 5th time in a row, and then the next year they won the Grey Cup. So that book tells the arc of those 3 years, and it was a lot of fun to write. And I think anybody, you don't have to be an Argo fan to enjoy the story of going from worst to first, and with the characters that were involved in the team and so on.
Well, the 1983 Argonauts that went into BC Place and beat the British Columbia Lions at home, that BC Lion team was a very good football team. And it was Joe Barnes to Cedric Minter that actually won the game. Yeah,
the famous call from Don Whitman, Barnes, Minter, touchdown. And of course, I was at that game. It was the first time I'd traveled outside of Ontario, and the first time I ever I was in BC Place for the first Grey Cup ever played there, and it was an unbelievable feeling. And I recount in the introduction to Bouncing Back how There was one, the Lions there was 18-17 for the Argos in the final minute of the game. BC starts at about their own 35, I think. And they had Roy DeWald and Merv Fernandez, and Roy could throw it and Merv could sure catch it. And Argos are leading 18-17, and it's tense. And there's 1 second left in the game, 1 second left on the clock, one more time for one last play. And one of the two guys I went out to the game with reached over and offered me his hand like he wanted to shake my hand. I said, no, like I'm not jinxing it. Like, this is the Argos, man. We could still blow this. And then, of course, they didn't blow it. The Roy's pass ended up falling short. A guy got batted down by one of the Argo defensive backs. The Argos had won. And it was almost like a sense of disbelief. And I remember there was an older guy in our section. We were sitting with a whole bunch of Argo fans for some reason. I got the tickets through the company I worked for at the time. And I think there had been a block of them had been allocated somehow to people that were from Toronto. And there was an older guy there, and he was crying. And he was just like saying, they won. They won. Like, he couldn't believe it. Like, he just couldn't believe his eyes that the Argos had finally won the Grey Cup. So, yeah, that was an amazing, amazing moment. And then my buddies and I had figured out a way to kind of break into the official hotel of the Grey Cup. During the week, the days leading up to the game, we'd figured out, okay, this is the headquarters. And if we enter through this door in the parking garage, we can get up to the second floor where the ballroom is. And so we snuck our way back up there after the game, and Argos were coming up to go to their victory party. Up on the escalator comes Paul Pearson, my favorite player, and I'm wearing a Paul Pearson jersey. And he gets off the elevator. He says, like, I've never seen anybody wearing one of my jerseys. Like, that's you can't get a better thing than that, right? Like, as an Argo fan, that was super, super fun. And I was so happy to be able to document that story and the journey that team went on, and to talk to so many of the key guys: Holloway, Pearson, Minter, Barnes, Greer, Ferroni, et cetera, Carinci. I mean, those guys they all loved telling the story, particularly the guys that had been there in 81 and then suffered through that 2-14 year under Willie Wood. To hear them recount the stories, I think any fan of Canadian football would really enjoy reading that book. And it got me started on this journey of writing books. I subsequently wrote The Year of the Rocket, and got another book on the way, and maybe a couple more that I'm kind of nurturing along, thinking they may turn into books. And now, of course, doing the channel and so on, right?
Yeah, 1981, that was the first year of full interlock where everybody played everybody in their stadium. It really sort of highlighted the differences between the power in the West and the power in the East.
Yeah, Saskatchewan wins 9 games and misses the playoffs. Montreal wins 3 games and gets into the playoffs. And Ottawa gets to the Grey Cup with 5 wins. Saskatchewan fans must have been so mad that year. That's ridiculous, right?
It was very difficult. But having said that, you've got to make it in your own division at that time. You just had no choice. So they had their chance in BC, but for a fumble at the goal line, they may have been in the playoffs.
Well, and then, you mentioned Joe Barnes. I mean, it was J.J. Barnagle, Joe Barnes and John Huffnagel, and got them to that 9-7 record. And then they let Barnes come to the Argos the next year, and thank you for that, right? I mean, he got hurt and didn't play much in 82, and he didn't play. He played some in 83. He and Holloway kind of split the job. Holloway started the Grey Cup, and Holloway was sick as a dog that week and didn't do well in the first half of the Grey Cup. Barnes comes in, and Barnes, Minter, touchdown. That's what got the Argos to the promised land. Joe Barnes will never have to pay for a drink for the rest of his life, in at least among Argo fans, right?
Now, 1991, of course, year of the Rocket. Raghib Ismail comes to the Toronto Argonauts, and the Argonauts go to the promised land again, and this time in a very frigid Winnipeg.
To me, that's the greatest year in the history of the Argonauts. I don't know that that's the greatest Argonauts team of all time. I still think 96, 97 probably is a better overall team. But 91 was an unbelievable year. I mean, the arrival of Bruce McNall, Wayne Gretzky, and John Candy as owners, it completely turned the whole perception of the Canadian Football League around overnight. And then they go and spend more money on Raghib Ismail than any football player had ever been paid in any team, in any league. He was making more money than the highest paid player in the NFL. And then they had that great season. They go through, 13-5. They roll all the way to the Grey Cup. They play the coldest Grey Cup of all time. Dunnigan playing with a broken clavicle. They only get, I think, 7 first downs in the entire game. But they win by 15 points over Calgary, and in large part thanks to the Rockets' kickoff return late in the fourth quarter. where he almost got beamed by a frozen can of beer. And I managed to track down the guy that I think threw that can of beer. I can't prove it. There's no way of establishing the truth of it, but I believe the guy I found is the guy that threw that can of beer. And that story is told in Year of the Rocket.
Wow. How would you track it? Because I don't think he was in frame when that happened. You'd see the can fly.
And of course, I mean, yeah, it was there was no high def television in those days. Don Whitman on the broadcast said he almost got hit by a snowball. But when you sort of look closely, you could see that it was a can of beer, and it looked like it was frozen, and there was beer coming out of it. Work on the book, I got to find this guy. I got to figure out how to track this guy down. Basically, what happened was I got to know a guy named Doug Spears, who at the time was a general columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press. The game, of course, had been played in Winnipeg. Doug interviewed me, and he did a story about, hey, there's this guy writing this book, and he's looking for the guy who threw the beer can. And so a bunch of people came out of the woodwork and got in touch with Doug or got in touch with me and said, yeah, I know the guy, or I saw it. It was 2 rows down from me, and they were giving me descriptions of what it looked like. And gradually I kind of zeroed in on it, seeming like it might be this guy here. Or it was a guy that said, look, it was my best friend. And we went to the game, and we're part of this thing called the Gotchmen. We would go to Bombers games in our underwear. The story kind of checked out. So gradually he connected me to this guy not living in Winnipeg any longer. I called him, and he said, yeah, it was me. And he told me all about it. And it all seemed, it has such a ring of truth to it. I don't think he could have been making up the whole story. So, and he didn't want his name in the book because he said, like, in this age of social media, like, I don't want to be pilloried. He'd seen what happened to the guy that threw a beer can at a Blue Jays playoff game about 10 years ago and almost beamed one of the Baltimore Oriole players. And this guy, he ended up losing his job and stuff, right? He didn't want his name in the book, and I agreed that that's fine. But it's still a really funny and a cool story. And just even the search for him is part of the story. What a slice of Canadiana, right? I mean, anytime they show craziest Grey Cup moments or craziest things that happened involving fans, that beer can ends up on the screen on TSN top 10 or whatever. It's a moment that's never going to go away from Canadian sports history. And it had gone basically untold for 30 years until the book came out 30 years after the 91 Grey Cup. So it was a really fun part of the project, as well as, talking to Dunnigan about playing with a broken collarbone and all the stuff about the Rocket and the amazing involvement of John Candy, who really kind of emerges as the hero of the story, and tragic hero in a way, because he's the only owner the Argonauts ever had who loved the team, and he died. If he could have lived, and if he could have stayed on as owner after McNall got into trouble with the authorities for all the frauds that he committed, who knows how things could have been different. But it's an incredible story in that year. And then, of course, the next year, things went bad, and Rocket stomped on the head of Andy McVeigh during a game. And that's also in the book. And that's a story, again, that will be told forever. So I'm glad to be the person that's telling it.
It's awesome. The last 2 Grey Cup wins from the Toronto Argonauts, in both circumstances, it looked like they were finished, and then something happens and the team pulls it from the brink. In 2017, it's a fumble that's picked up when the Stampeders are within 10 yards of putting the game away, that goes with Cassius Vaughn all the way back, and suddenly a game that looked like was over, the Argonauts are in.
They know what it feels like, these Calgary Stampeders, to be close and watch it slip through their fingers. First and goal from the gate with McDaniel on the move. 4 receivers to the near side. Fake to Messa. Look out. Jordan bounced off first contact. And then fumbles the football. It's picked up. Cassius Vaughn's got it. Only Mitchell to stop him. And Cassius Vaughn racing down the field. Maybe one man left to catch him. But a convoy and a block. And it's an Argo touchdown. He had a 115-yarder against Calgary earlier this year on an interception. This a fumble recovery and over 100 yards.
Yeah, that was that's one of my fondest memories. My daughter, who's just in her early 40s, she has become a giant Argonaut fan since she was a kid. She sort of grew up with me. I've got a son as well who likes the Argos, but he's more of an NFL fan, and that's fine. She's as fanatical as I am about the team. And of course, we were at the game in Ottawa in 2017, which was so magical. The snow globe, the Shania Twain, the sled dogs. As you alluded to, Don, we were sort of getting deep into the fourth quarter. The Argonauts are trailing by 8 points. Calgary's moving the ball. Calgary's coming towards the end of the field where we're sitting. We had a fantastic view. We were in the first row of the upper deck in TD Place, and it was a wonderful place to be watching the game. And we're both sort of sitting there kind of glumly thinking to ourselves, well, it's been a really good season and we kind of went farther than we thought we were going to get. It'd be a shame to lose, but still good. And then, of course, Bo Levi Mitchell throws that little dump pass. The receiver's heading towards the goal line.
Kamar Jordan,
I believe you're right. Yes. It's in the book, so I should know, but I've forgotten the details. And all, as up by 8 points, Calgary only needed a field goal to put the game away, but they decided that they were gonna try for more, and so Jordan gets swarmed by Argos. Suddenly, the ball is lying on the turf and kind of skittering along in the snow. Cassius Vaughn, he scoops the thing up and starts running, and all of a sudden he's got a convoy, and he's like, and my daughter is shrieking, and like tears are streaming down, and shrieking with like joy and disbelief, and I'm feeling the same way, and we're watching this unfold. That was so unbelievable to be part of that, to see that. And then, of course, they tied it with the 2-point convert, and then there's an exchange of possessions, and Ricky Ray gets the Argos into position for a field goal, and Calgary still has a chance. And of course, Bo throws that deep bomb into the right corner of the end zone, and drifting over is Matt Black to help out with the coverage. And he reaches up and snags that pass, and it picks it off, and suddenly we've won the Grey Cup, and it's like, oh man, that is like such a sweet memory, so sweet. And my daughter happened to be wearing a game-worn Matt Black jersey that day, and we got to show him, like we went down towards where the Argos come off the field to go to their locker room, and Matt Black's coming, and I kind of got his attention and showed him my daughter's jersey. Like, again, you don't get better than that stuff, right?
Well, and then the Argonauts wind up in Regina, and they're playing against the vaunted Winnipeg Blue Bombers. In the midst of that second half, McLeod Bethel Thompson breaks a finger.
Yeah, and my next book is about McLeod Bethel Thompson, and it is an unbelievable story. I know that McLeod Bethel Thompson had his detractors around the CFL, including among Argo fans. He was a polarizing figure. There were a lot of Argo fans that never warmed to Mac. I really did warm to him long before 2022. In fact, by halfway through the 2019 season, I thought this guy is the guy that needs to be the quarterback of this team. And it took another 2 years before Dinwiddie came along and made him the starting quarterback. My book about him, which is now done but awaiting, I'm looking for a publisher, and so I don't know when it's going to come out. It tells his entire story, which is an amazing journey. I mean, he had 14 different times that he was trying out for an NFL team. The NFL teams loved his arm, loved his leadership qualities, loved his personality, loved how he picked up the playbook, but he just was never in the right situation at the right time. And then he gets to Canada and he struggles to win a spot for 3.5 years, until finally Dinwiddie anoints him as the starter. And then they get to the Grey Cup in 2022. He and I were talking every week throughout that 2022 season. So I have an incredible inside view of what was going on in his head and in his heart and in that locker room throughout that season. And my daughter and I, of course, go to the Grey Cup because I was writing the book and I had to be there for the way, however it was going to end. I had to be there. And then, as you say, he breaks his thumb in the fourth quarter, and they end up winning the game. But it wasn't the sort of the Cinderella story ending that I would have hoped for, that he would have hoped for. But they still won the Grey Cup, and it was still super fun to be part of that. And it adds another storyline to what's already an incredible story about McLeod Bethel Thompson. So anybody, again, you don't have to be an Argo fan or even a McLeod Bethel Thompson fan. I think if you're a football fan or even a fan of just incredible journeys, I think people will enjoy reading this book when it finally comes out, whenever that may be.
You can count on one finger how many times the Grey Cup has had 2 blocked field goals in the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, what an unbelievable ending. That is absolutely right. Again, so these things seem to happen, right? The Argos seem to end up in these games where crazy stuff happens and they end up winning, whether it's the beer can with the Rocket. Adrian Smith returning the opening kickoff in the second half against Saskatchewan. Funny story about the 96 Grey Cup was Edmonton-Toronto in Hamilton. I mentioned I'd been at that game, and I was there. I was working for Canadian Press at the time. I was mostly an editor, but I had done some sports reporting earlier in my career, and the sport editor was a very nice guy who said, "Do you want to come and help us out with our coverage on game day at the Grey Cup?" "Oh yeah, I'll do that." So I was in the press box watching the game, and of course you don't cheer in the press box, but silently I'm hoping for the Argos to win. But I'm also there hoping for good stories and what am I gonna write about when the game is over and so on. But it was funny, it's an old Iverwin Stadium. Somebody came into the press box with about 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Said, "Okay, if you're going into the locker room to interview anybody, you got to come downstairs now." And so, okay, so a bunch of us leave the press box and go down, walk through the stands, down the stairs in the stadium to get down to field level. They put us down on field level, and so I got to watch the last 5 or so minutes of that game on field level, standing on the sidelines. And of course, the snow is still coming down. It was a gorgeous moment of Canadiana, and the RCMP guys are bringing the cup down, and it doesn't get more exciting than that for a football fan. I'm down in I guess it would be the northeast corner of Iverwin Stadium on the sideline, and it was a tight game. I forget the exact score, but it was really tight. Danny McManus for Edmonton throws a pass. It gets deflected into the arms of Adrian Smith, who races to the end zone and is swarmed by teammates after scoring what looked like and turned out to be the clinching touchdown. And this is all happening about 10 feet in front of me. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I could jump on that pile right now. But I was a journalist. I just watched it and didn't do it. But every time I watch that highlight, I think, man, I was so close. I could have jumped on that top of that scrum.
Now they have to refocus, though. The ball just nudging the Edmonton 40, a minute 33 to go. And Danny McManus, who was perfect on the last drive, 6 for 6, goes to work, delivering, picked off. Adrian Smith is going to score. Touchdown, Argonauts.
So yeah, I mean, those kinds of things happen to the Argos when they get to the Grey Cup, it seems like. And I wasn't at the one in 97 at Edmonton, but I've been at all the other ones prior to and since then, since 82. And it's always great to see the Argos in the Grey Cup, and it's even better as an Argo fan to see them win the Grey Cup. I believe our streak is currently 7-0. Nobody's going to top that, I don't think.
And will it change ever with Pinball Clemens involved, Michael Clemens involved with the team, because he has never lost a Grey Cup?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we better stay alive forever.
I'm sure. I know you're passionate about this league, and I know you're passionate about how the game is played. Your thoughts on the rule changes? We're seeing some of them being implemented in 2026, where time is going to be sped up a little bit. And I know you and I had talked on a previous podcast where you could jump 30 seconds and the play would be back in, and that has been long gone. Do you think the 35-second clock is getting close to that?
Yes, I do. I'm really a fan of that change. I would have liked it to have been a 30-second clock, but that's probably too aggressive, at least at first. My estimate, I mean, this is a guess. This is not based on science, but I believe this is going to result in something between 5 and 10 more offensive snaps per game. 5 or 10 more times when a quarterback is going to take the ball from center and something's going to happen. If that does unfold that way, that's a good thing. We go to games to watch plays, right? We don't go to watch guys standing around and waiting for the ref to twirl his arm and start the clock, and then another 15 seconds ticks off. So I'm a big fan of that change. I'm basically on side with all of the changes. I don't love the change to the Rouge. I like it, but I don't love it. I wish they had made it so that if a kick ball lands within the end zone and is playable, it has to be returned or a single surrendered. I don't like the idea that it could roll out the back, or the teams could just watch it go. So I wish they would tweak that rule. but I don't have a problem with the change to the field size. I think putting the goalpost at the back of the end zone, I think it will work the way that the league intends it to be. We'll see. We won't see that one until next year. I believe that's a 2027. Yeah, having the benches on opposite sides makes sense. I think we've seen too many times when they're on the same side when stupid stuff happens between teams.
But that was very much an Eastern approach, wasn't it? In every Eastern city, that's the way it was done. And then Vancouver with BC Lions, they did it some years, they didn't others.
Yeah, I think there were configuration reasons for it, I think primarily, but I mean it's actually funny. It's going to change things a little bit though. Like my seats, my season's tickets at BMO are at about the 38-yard line behind the Argonaut bench, almost dead even with where the tent goes up if there's an injury. I can get a pretty good view on what's going on with guys on the sideline getting treated, and I mean I can see the interaction that's going on the field and so on on the sidelines with the Argos. They'll move them all down more towards center field, I guess, and so I'll probably be more equal to where the kicker and the punter are than where the coaches and the tent are. But you know what? It's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's all going to come out even in the wash if they can achieve the goal that Stuart Johnston stated, which is more entertainment, hopefully more touchdowns. Then great. I think the field changes are going to open up some revenue possibilities for the teams. Like they'll have party zones back of the end zones and things like that, and they'll make money. I don't personally go to football games to drink a lot of beer and party with my friends. I go to watch the game, but there's a lot of people that go to drink beer and party with their friends. Okay, good. Cater to them. Bring that money in. That helps support the league, right?
And one thing I do wonder about, and this is for Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, maybe Calgary, maybe Edmonton, the stadiums that are pretty much concreted in. Does the 55 become the new 50, or do they move it a little bit because it fits better this way and not so much that way?
This is a big unanswered question, no doubt. I mean, I've wondered myself, like, is my seat on the 38-yard line actually going to end up being on the 30? Like, right? I don't know. We'll all find that stuff out in 2027 when they change them. I would imagine that in places like out west, there's probably no reason not to just kind of shove it in equal amount on both ends. Whereas in Toronto, I think because of the way the stadium is configured, there's a chance it might actually be skewed more in one direction than the other. So we'll find that out, I guess, in a year and a bit from now. But either way, I'm there to watch football. I love watching Canadian football. I love watching the Argonauts. And if these changes help ensure the success and survival of the league for a long time, then I'm all for them.
Well, and if anyone has any more passion for this league, I don't know who it is. And Paul Woods, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I love the fact that you're doing that YouTube channel where history can come back alive.
Well, thank you, Don. I always enjoy, as I said at the beginning, enjoy talking to you, enjoy talking Canadian football. As you can tell, I have a lot of passion for it, as do you, as do a lot of people that fly the flag every day in one way or the other. We got a great podcast community. We've got lots of really hardcore fans. Some of whom are not so happy about some of these changes, but hopefully we won't lose them all, and hopefully we'll maybe over time gain some new ones as well, right? And if what you're doing and if what I'm doing helps contribute to that, fantastic.
Before you leave, Paul, direct people to your YouTube channel and to your socials.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So it's the YouTube channel is called Canadian Football Time Machine. You should be able to find it pretty simply if you just go to YouTube and search under that name. Find me. I'm still on the old Twitter. I don't post very much on there anymore, but I'm still there at PXW13. I do have a web page, but it's not dynamic. It's paulwoodsmedia.com, but it's basically just a place to sort of kind of promote the books and things. And I'm assuming that as we get closer to publication date for the Bethel Thompson book, I'll be getting a more vibrant social media presence than I currently have. I'm always looking forward to hearing from people, though. If people have comments about the YouTube channel, they can contact me at Canadian Football Time Machine at gmail.com, or my direct line is paulwoods13 @gmail.com. Reach out to me through email or Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.
'83 Grey Cup, Toronto's Joe Barnes finds Cedric Minter for a late go-ahead touchdown. Final score Toronto 18-BC 17.
Well, you look up there at that clock, there's 3 minutes left up there, and they're marching. First down at the 25. Barnes throwing to Pearson, down at the 2-yard line. A gain of 22 on the pass to Paul Pearson. Leo Cahill, you've done it again. In our pregame show, you said that Pearson could be the hero. First and goal from the 3. Barnes, Minter, touchdown!